Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for part 5 of our story tonight. Isn't it an exciting story? So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 5 of our story. What happened next shocked me in more ways than you can ever imagine. For a lofty, gargantuan, dense silhouette, as black as a dark, ambiguous cloud, floated towards me like a ghostly entity, and on her ponderous shoulders she was carrying little Clarice, who was holding little Pluto to her chest, and her tiny little legs dangled on either side of the creature's short neck. I realized in astonishment that this bear lady was not a fictitious figure of fiction, or of Clarice's overactive, fertile imagination, but was a real live Bigfoot. Stranger still, little Clarice seemed incredibly comfortable and at ease with the Bigfoot, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to be sitting on her shoulders. I was amazed she was not afraid of such a large beast that was so monstrously huge, built like a powerful, indestructible concrete building, covered with hair as black as a raven's feathers, with a purple hue. The creature had a bullet-shaped head that seamlessly folded into its substantial shoulders, and possessed a human-looking face, with dark, energetic eyes that seemed privately amused by my shocked reaction to her. I knew at once the Bigfoot was female. There was no doubt. She had tiny impressions for breasts that were almost lost on her large torso, and a warm, protective, matriarchal energy. I was confounded, so much so that for a brief moment my legs began to crumble beneath me, as if I was going to fold over like a camping chair and lose my stability, and I was going to pass out from the shock. My heart was pounding vigorously in my chest, as this Bigfoot was the most intimidating thing I have ever beheld. I was so staggered by how human she looked, but the first words that seemed to trespass into my mind were, "Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I've been waiting for you. I've been looking after the girl. It's not safe to leave her alone in the woods at night. Why would you bring her here to show me a kitten? Could she not have done that during the day? There are things in the wood you need to be careful of. And who would call a kitten Pluto? That's not the right name for this cat. You must be careful when choosing names. They need to fit. Every name has an energy signature, and it's very important to choose the right one." I know it sounds completely crazy, but those were the words I heard in my head. "It's complicated," I said out loudly in response to what she'd said to me. And then she suddenly spoke to me in a language that I was able to understand, that was clearly rooted in ancient origins that I suspect go back for many generations. "Holon taka, hitakwa saniko, holapi sakila." I wouldn't make a habit of bringing the child into the woods at night if I was you. It's best to let her play games during the day, when she can see her way clearly. "But of course," I said, "you're right." "Kolotoka, hilaki kwasa, hopati lanikwa, hilani solofono." "I don't know what's going on here," said the Bigfoot, "but people, lots of them, were looking for this little girl in the woods when she was not here. But I scared them off by feeding their minds with scary thoughts, and that did the trick. I got rid of them. I don't like people trespassing on my property at night, when they don't belong on this land." Thank you so much for looking after her," I said to the Bigfoot. "I really appreciate it." "Kolotaka, hasakwasina, likati." I always look out for her. I have since she was born, and I watch over you too, and all who live in the house. The Bigfoot put little Clarice on the ground. "Can't I go for another ride? Please, can't I go for another ride?" Clarice asked the Bigfoot. Please, it'll be so fun. I like to ride the horsey." The Bigfoot spoke firmly to Clarice. "Kotolopi, hatakakwina, holopo." I didn't know what she said this time, as the translation did not appear in my head. Little Clarice nodded obediently, her little face showing disappointment, but she ran over to me with Pluto in her arms, and I put Pluto in my shoulder bag, and I carried little Clarice on my hips through the grove of trees, feeling a profound sense of relief that she was now safe. When I reached Izzy's long red brick driveway, the police were returning to their vehicles. Their eyes were as wide as saucers when I emerged through the grove with little Clarice, who dropped from my hips onto her feet and ran up to her mother with the joy of a child who hadn't seen her mother for an age, and their happy embrace meant the tears leapt down my cheeks. "Oh, goodness gracious, Clarice, it's you! I can't believe it! Oh, thank God you're all right! Thank God you're all right! I thought something dreadful had happened to you. What on earth were you doing in the woods? Oh, Lucy, thank you so much for going into the woods for me. Oh, thank you for finding her. I can't believe she's actually fine. How could you do this to me, sweetheart? We've all been so worried. Everybody's been looking for you." "But I'm fine, Mummy," said Clarice. "I wasn't even scared. The bear lady gave me a shoulder ride and I got a brand new kitten. I want to show you my kitten, Mummy." Clarice ran over to me to retrieve the kitten. "Can I keep her, Mummy? Because I've been a good girl and I wasn't afraid of the dark when Lucy found me. It was fun playing hide and seek in the dark, but I was a good girl." As I had predicted, Izzy was putty in her hands. "Of course you can keep the little kitten. But why did you go into the woods, sweetheart?" The police were happy that mother and child had been reunited. They concluded that the tiny little girl had been bashfully hiding in the woodgrove because she was too afraid and didn't want to reveal herself to strangers, but had responded to my calls because I was her au pair, and she knew me well. "Did I not tell you, ma'am," said one of the officers, "that not all hope is lost? You've got your child back, and at the end of the day, that's what matters." "I'm so sorry to have wasted your time, officers. I had no idea she was in the woods like that." "You didn't waste our time. It was a pleasure to be able to help you." Izzy's account. The bizarre events of what transpired on the night my daughter went missing are very blurry and obscure. Ask anyone who's been involved in a traumatic event of any kind to give you the details of what happened on that occasion, and I can guarantee they'll say something like, "I can't remember," or that my memory is rather vague. When I lost my child and the police arrived at my house, all I could think about was little Clarice. I noticed and observed little else. The police could have arrived at my house sporting spiking green mohawks and piercings in their ears and chewing tobacco, and guess what? I'd likely have not noticed a single thing. When you're fraught with worry and anxiety, you become tunnel-visioned, as your only focus is trying to find your child. I've always had a dim view of parents who don't keep a watchful eye on their children 24/7, but I've now learnt that it's impossible to keep your eyes pinned on your child all the time. It can take a second of being distracted and a lifetime of wondering where your child went. I remember when I was a little girl, my mother brought me a kitten, and one day it just disappeared. We searched high and low for it everywhere, and all these years later, we still do not know what happened to that little kitten. When it came to little Clarice, I had left her alone in the kitchen, eating fish finger dinosaurs, and I'd gone upstairs to answer a call from my husband, who told me he'd be home late. I don't think I was on that phone call for very long, but when I returned to the kitchen door was wide open, swinging on its hinges, and my daughter had vanished into thin air. That was all it took, and it was the most dreadful moment of my entire life. I was convinced the kitchen door had been closed. It would have been impossible for my daughter to reach the handle without standing on a chair to open it. The truth is, doubt begins to seep into your mind, and you start to wonder if the door had been open after all. You start to doubt yourself as being a responsible parent. There are no words to describe how delighted I was to have my daughter back home again, but her idiosyncratic behaviour left me with more questions than answers. Why had she run out of the kitchen that day into the woods? I thought that maybe she'd chased after the little kitten that had got lost in the trees. It was the only explanation that made any sense to me. I thought the police had not found her because she had hidden from them. I'd taught her never to talk to strangers. It was the strange remarks that Clarice made that made me wonder about that night when she ran into the woods. She'd say odd things like how brave she was to play hide-and-seek in the dark, and now she was brave she was a big girl, which meant that she could be trusted with a kitten. I began to suspect there was more to my daughter's disappearance than actually met the eye. My daughter had been determined to call her kitten Pluto long before she ever acquired the little mite. She had told anyone who would listen that when she got a kitten, it was going to be called Pluto, like a large planet. But when I started to call the kitten Pluto, she corrected me. "My kitten isn't Pluto. The bear lady said I should call her Zisa." I remember thinking, where did she get a name like that from? I asked her why she wanted to call the kitten such a strange, rather peculiar name. "But it's not strange, Mummy," my daughter insisted. "Zisa means one who wears white with black. My kitten is black and white, so Zisa is the right name for her." I have to say, Zisa is actually a good name for the kitten. It suits her. But when she told me the bear lady had told her this, I couldn't help wondering if an imaginary friend would actually talk like this. Was there more to the bear lady than actually met the eye? I noticed for a week after having lost my daughter that Lucy was being strangely aloof towards me, as if she was clandestinely hiding something from me. She also looked guilty all the time, especially when I began to talk about my daughter's disappearance. She'd promptly shut me down and say things like, "You've got her back, Izzy. That's the main thing. Don't dwell on all this negative stuff. Move on. You've got her back. Isn't that all that matters?" Having said that, Lucy was the one who persuaded me that I had to tell my husband about my indiscretions on the night of the hen party. "You've got to tell him, Izzy," she said. "He knows little Clarice went missing and went hiding in the woods. But supposing he hears someone suggesting that Clarice might not be his own child, imagine how bad it'll sound if he hears some rumour or speculation from a strange person who is not you. You've really got to be straight with him, or it could backfire against you big time. Word gets out, Izzy. People talk, you know." "But I can't tell him," I said. "How can I possibly tell him something like that? It'll break his heart." In truth, underneath the layers of my denial, my secret was cutting me up inside, and I knew that Lucy was right. I had to tell my husband. One day Lucy presented me with an envelope. "Open it," she insisted. I could see it was from a DNA laboratory. "I got your husband's DNA tested. I hope you don't mind," she told me. "You need to know the truth, Izzy. If you don't open it, I will, and I'll tell you the results myself, whether you want to hear them or not." I was furious that Lucy had taken the initiative to do a DNA test. In that moment I hated her, but I knew she meant business, so I reluctantly opened the envelope and read the results. My hands were trembling as I stared at the paper, tears sliding down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry," said Lucy. "I didn't mean to do this to you. But I think we both knew that Chuck wasn't your daughter's father. Not really. They don't look at all alike. I'm sure you knew that too." "Lucy, that's just it. My husband is Lucy's father. I don't understand. How can that be? She doesn't even look like him. How is this even possible?" Lucy eagerly snatched the envelope from me to read the contents of the DNA report, and her eyes stood up on stalks. "You're right, Izzy! Oh, my word! Your husband is almost 99% a match to Clarice. He's her father. This is incredible news." We began dancing around the house, both of us crying in relief, unable to believe the good news. Lucy had agreed that given that Chuck was my daughter's father, I didn't need to enlighten him about my hen party fiasco. I mean, what was the point? Given the DNA results affirmed he was Clarice's father. We all make mistakes after all that we regret, and sometimes it's best to put them behind us and learn from them. Let's not kid. Ignorance is bliss, as it successfully avoids any unnecessary hurt along the way. And I certainly did not want to be responsible for dragging my poor husband through the muddy, mucky mire of my repentance, soiling him with the miserable revelation of what I'd done to cast a dark shadow of doubt over the paternity of our child. Ostensibly I was like a camel, carrying an excess of guilt in an invisible hump that was weighing me down, and the shame was eating away at me like a worm in an apple. By all accounts, sometimes the truth has an unfortunate, rather nasty way of seeping out, like the remnants of sweet maple from a tree, successfully tapped, or a backstabbing friend, blessed with a curse of a loose tongue. I had carelessly thrown the DNA results into the kitchen bin, and my husband found them, and was less than amused. I often wondered if there was a large part of me that secretly wanted my husband to uncover my dirty little secret. I had failed to destroy the evidence, which was not exactly prudent of me. I would never have been a good spy for the Gestapo, that is for sure. I was like an unwily snail, leaving its slime trail along the grass, straight to our kitchen dustbin. "What the hell is going on here?" my husband asked me, studying the envelope and removing the DNA report, which he began to read twice over, with a befuddled expression on his face, which grew as dark as a thundercloud, as his eyes burned into mine. "Why has our daughter's DNA been tested against mine? Is there something you're not telling me, Izzy?" In that moment, I was sure our marriage was about to implode. I knew now I'd have to tell Chuck the truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I'll never forget the way he looked at me, his sky-blue eyes fierce with indignation, and there was hurt in those eyes. "I'm listening. Tell me everything. No one gets a DNA test done, do they? Unless they secretly suspect that their child might be the offspring of another man. I think, Izzy, you've got some explaining to do, and this better be good." "But you can see that you are Clarice's father." I trembled. I could not hold my husband's piercing gaze, for there are no words to describe the shame I felt. It was like he was looking right through me, as if I was a clear pane of glass. It was like I was having a life review of my filthy indiscretions in front of a room full of accusers, determined to take me down and throw me out with the dirty bathwater. I spent the next few minutes studying my bare feet, as if I had become seriously intrigued by the turquoise nail polish I was wearing. Chuck did not deserve any of this. I just couldn't look at him straight in the face. I felt dirty, cheap, and disgusted with myself. "I know it looks bad, but I can explain." "That's the understatement of the century, Izzy. It looks worse than bad. What's a man supposed to think when his DNA's being tested against his own offspring?" "I haven't cheated on you during our marriage, but I'm afraid I did have a fling on my hen night with 2 men. But I was so drunk, I didn't know what I was doing. I was mortified when I realized what I'd done. You've got to believe me, Chuck." My husband looked at me in disgust. He raised a brow and rubbed his chin. "Do I even know you, Izzy? You disgust me. I don't know what to say. You were intimate with 2 men on your hen party. How the hell am I supposed to digest this information? This is beyond treacherous and deceitful. Worse than that, you've kept the secret from me for over 3 years. How do you think that makes me feel? When we got married, we agreed there would be no secrets between us." "Yes, because I was disgusted with myself, don't you see? I couldn't believe what I'd done. I was scared of you reacting like this if I told you the truth. I so did not want to hurt you because it meant absolutely nothing. You've got to believe me." "I'm sorry, Izzy, but when anybody drinks, they are responsible for the way they conduct themselves. When you're drunk, you still have an idea what you're doing. You're using alcohol as an excuse for your licentious behaviour. This is not the upstanding Izzy, the devoted, faithful woman I know and love. I'm beginning to wonder if I know you at all." "That's not fair, Chuck, and you know it. You're not being fair. Everybody knows what substances can do to you. They alter your behaviour.
That's why when people drink and drive, they're such a threat to the safety of other road users. They think they can drive safely, but they can't. Their perception is distorted. A drunk person cannot even walk in a straight line. You have no idea what I was like that night. I was just behaving really weird. You can ask Lucy about it. She saw how bladdered I was.
What you did was deplorable, Izzy. And quit trying to make excuses for yourself like this. Mud sticks.
Don't you think I don't know that? How do you think I feel about myself? I'm so ashamed by my conduct.
My husband was so inflamed with anger. His face had grown as red as a field of poppies, and his Adam's apple appeared to be jiggling in contempt. He trembled as he marched up the stairs and began to toss clothes into an open suitcase. And I knew he meant business. He was leaving me. I could feel his fury so tangibly. It was so hot it could have potentially brought down the house in flames. I had never seen my husband so mad. But despite his insatiable anger, I felt relief that the cat was out of the bag finally, even if it had the potential to destroy my marriage. This clandestine secret had been eating away at me for the last 3 years and 9 months, and I'd often wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, terrified my husband was going to find out my secret.
Where are you going, Chuck? You can't leave me. You can't throw us away like that. It was a mistake. You must believe me. I'd never willingly set out to hurt you. You know that. It was a substance that made me behave like that. This wasn't me. You know I would never behave like this in the cold light of day.
That's the problem, Izzy. I do not know who you are anymore. It seems awfully convenient to me to blame everything on the alcohol. It's like shirking responsibilities for what you actually did. You should be ashamed of yourself, and you call yourself my wife. What kind of a wife behaves like you do?
I watched in horror as my husband trotted down the staircase with his suitcase, climbing into his car, and then he was gone. I phoned up Lucy that night because I couldn't bear to be alone, and my faithful friend arrived on the scene, and I cried in her arms.
I don't know what I'm going to do, Lucy. You should have seen how angry he was. I don't think he'll ever forgive me. Why doesn't he understand that mistakes happen in life? Surely our marriage should be built on a strong foundation, so that even when it's hit by a tornado, it can still withstand it. It seems a little hiccup, and it all comes tumbling down. Should we not be forgiven for our mistakes? We're human, aren't we?
You are right, Izzy. We are all human, and we all make mistakes. So I'm going to test you on that one. And so now you've told your husband your little secret, I'm going to tell you mine. That was when Lucy told me about how her cousin Tyler had abducted my daughter on the night that my daughter went missing. And for a while I felt furiously angry about the betrayal, as my husband lightly felt towards mine. Then I realised it was a little like the pot calling the kettle black. If I couldn't forgive Tyler Paget for his dreadful mistake, how could I expect my husband to forgive me for mine? If I had any hope that my husband would forgive me, I knew I needed to start forgiving myself, or my lack of forgiveness might backfire against me.
But why did Tyler take little Clarice? I asked her. I don't understand.
It was a grievous mistake. My cousin got carried away.
But why? Why didn't you tell me the truth at the time? You're my best friend, for goodness sake.
Your husband is your best friend, Izzy. I might ask you the very same question myself. Why did you not tell your husband the truth when you cheated on him with 2 men? You wanted to protect your marriage. In the same breath, I wanted to protect my cousin. You were in such a dreadful state that night. I was afraid you'd insist on filing charges against Tyler, and that he'd be locked away in prison for a long time. Believe me, he's remorseful for what he did, as you are regretful about what happened at the hen party. He's even more ashamed, given that Clarice was never his child in the first place. I nodded. Tell him I forgive him, I said gingerly. I knew he'd made a mistake. Nothing he'd done was premeditated. I suddenly felt empathy for Tyler. I tried to imagine myself seeing Clarice for the very first time and believing her to be my daughter. It would have been hard to walk away from her. I'd have wanted to snatch her and run. I definitely forgive him, I repeated. I really do. And I forgive you for your charade in the woods. I just hope my husband will exercise the same compassion towards me. But I'm not sure he will. Lucy took my hand in hers and gave it a tight, encouraging squeeze. Look, Izzy, give him time. Have you ever read the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus? No, I can't say I have. What's that got to do with anything? A whole lot, as it happens, said Lucy. The book advises women to give men space, to go into their man cave, to think. Men need lots of space, and women need to give them that. I believe your husband is a sensible, wise man. He's not going to throw his marriage away over a drunken night, when you had lost leave of your senses, even though he says he doesn't know you any more. That's not true. He does know you, and he also knows how loyal you are. He's a good man, he really is, and he loves the bones of you. Your marriage is not made of chaff. It's not going to come tumbling down after a little windstorm. If that were the case, what would be the point in marriage? You both made vows to each other in sickness and in health, did you not? Yes, we did, I said. But what's the point in that anyway? What are you trying to say? I'm trying to say you were sick in the head, were you not, Izzy? When you drank too much? Well, when you put it like that, I suppose you're right, I said. Your husband is tough, Izzy. He can overcome greater odds than his wife's unfortunate indiscretions, which I'm sure he'll overlook. And on the bright side, at least you've got no more skeletons in your cupboard anymore. I hope you're right, Lucy, I said. I was grateful that night that Lucy had decided to stay over. I couldn't bear to be alone in the house, and without Chuck on the opposite side of the bed, I knew I'd feel dreadfully alone. I had an awful feeling that he was going to file for divorce, but I couldn't allow myself to meditate over such uncongenial thoughts. Needless to say, I cried myself to sleep that night, tossing and turning in my bed restlessly, wishing with all my heart that I had a time machine and could go back to undo all my mistakes. I wonder how many people in life would like to do just that. The following morning I woke up feeling certain that everything that had transpired the previous day had been a nasty dream. I realised it was no dream when my husband's side of the bed was ice cold to the touch. I felt nauseously sick to the stomach when I realised he hadn't even returned home last night. Furthermore, he'd left me no messages on my cell phone. Lucy had advised me not to contact him at all. Leave him alone, Izzy. Let him be, she told me. Give him his space. Remember, he's brooding in his man cave. Lucy came into my bedroom the following morning with a breakfast tray and some hot coffee. The smell of those coffee beans warmed my heart. Lucy was a good, faithful friend, and she was taking such good care of my daughter. You must eat something, Lucy insisted. To keep your strength up, it's very important. You look as white as a sheet, and there are dark circles under your eyes. But I can't eat, I told her. My stomach feels wobbly. You know what you need, said Lucy. You need a walk in the grove. The trees will make you feel a whole lot better. There's something really reassuring and grounding when you walk among the trees. I think it'll give you a measure of peace. Go on, off with you, she encouraged me. You need some colour in your washed-up cheeks. And you never know, you might actually work up an appetite. I'll be taking care of Clarice for you. Run along, why don't you? I promise you, you won't regret it. I had learnt from experience that Lucy was usually right about most things, and that I was unlikely to regret going for a walk in the grove. But it was so difficult to pull myself out of my blurry fog. I felt so vacuously empty, not knowing what the future held for me. I had horrifying visions of divorce papers, lawyers, and my daughter's life tossed precariously between two different home addresses. I didn't want my daughter growing up in a broken home, nor did I want my relationship with Chuck to fall apart, like a clump of dandelion seeds in the wind, being blown away in the wind. I couldn't get the haunting images of my husband's disappointed look that I'd seen in his eyes. It was as if he'd been hit like a brick to the head when he learnt of my infidelity with two men, 2 weeks before our wedding day, when we had promised to be faithful to each other. I had destroyed that promise, but beyond that, I had broken the trust we shared together. Ostensibly, everybody knows that trust is a huge deal in relationships. Without trust,
You can't build a secure foundation, can you? It's like building a house out of hay that could catch a light, disintegrate, grow mould and rot, or be blown away by a single gust of wind. So I decided to abandon my whimpering thoughts that were indignantly crawling inside my head like fat, hungry maggots eating away at my deflated hope, so that there was nothing left inside of me, and I was as hollow as a doll. If I didn't get it together, I'd fall apart, and my little girl needed her mother, and so for her sake I couldn't crumble like a cookie. With that thought in mind, I ran a brush through my hair that looked limp and straggly, with all its healthy shine vanquished from it. I washed my face, brushed my teeth, threw on a pair of ugly-looking jogging pants, a sweater and sneakers, and with a great wary reluctance I came into the kitchen, looking like a half-eaten bird the cat had dragged in overnight. "Mummy! Mummy!" said Clarice, who was sitting at the breakfast table, rambunctiously eating a very messy Pop-Tart, and was waving her tiny little arms around like a little octopus. She had strawberry-crusted stains over her mouth and cheeks, and looked absolutely adorable. The very sight of her made my heart melt, and my day seemed a lot less oppressive. My daughter's beloved black and white kitten was sitting yards away from her at the table, happily tucking into a poached chicken, looking very contented indeed. Clarice insisted that it was very rude for us to eat meals without Zisa at the table, as she was part of the family, so how could I argue with that? "What's wrong with you, Mummy?" asked little Clarice, her round eyes growing concerned when she saw my wretched state. She could see the dark circles under my eyes, and the unfortunate pink blotches all over my skin. I knew I looked a sorry sight, but grief can leach the health out of your complexion like nothing else I know. I had been mortified by the wretched, ghost-like face staring back at me in the bathroom mirror, deprived of all its vital colour, with eyes that looked like black hollows. My daughter could pick up my melancholia at once. "Mummy, you look really sad. You look sad. I don't like it when you look sad." I couldn't get over how my young child was as sharp as a hawk. She didn't miss a trick. I hope she hadn't noticed that her father had not been around. She probably thought he'd left for work early. I really didn't want to have to tell her that Mummy and Daddy might not be living together. How did parents explain things like that to their children? "Mummy might look sad," I told her, "but look at you! You look so messy. Did you manage to eat any of the jam in the Pop-Tart? Or did you decide to paint it all over your little face?" My daughter began to giggle, and I took her in my arms and kissed her on her chubby cheeks, ruffling the curls of her long dark hair. I was amazed the DNA results affirmed she was Chuck's daughter. I mean, how did that happen? She looked nothing like him. "Mummy's sad because she's got a headache, that's why," I told her. "I'm sad when I've got a headache because my head hurts. You'd be sad if your head hurts, wouldn't you?" My daughter considered this for a moment. "Well, when I fell off my tricycle and I hurt my knee, I was sad 'cause it stung a lot." "There you go. Now you know why your mummy's sad." "Your mummy's not feeling well this morning," said Lucy, coming to my rescue. "She's going to the Woodgrove for a walk so that she feels better." "Can I come with Mummy? Can I come with you?" my daughter asked me eagerly. "Please, please can I come?" "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but Mummy's got to go alone." "You must speak to the bear lady. She'll make you feel much, much better," said my girl. "The bear lady makes everything feel better. She makes me feel better when I was playing hide-and-seek in the dark 'cause I wasn't scared when she was there. She's very nice, the bear lady." "I'll bear that in mind," I said, and sauntered out of the house, knowing that 2 pairs of eyes, including the cat, were pinned on me, and that I was being watched through the kitchen window as I trudged towards the grove of trees, kicking up the ground with my sneakers and scattering pieces of dirt liberally along the path. I will admit that the moment I casually strode out of the house, I began to feel much, much better. I believe moving your body helps you with your thoughts.
I understand when it comes to criminals, they get far more confessions from convicted felons when they're moving their bodies around, and even when they're being transported to their cells, than when they're actually sitting in an interrogation room. Perhaps all police interviews and interrogations should actually be done with a treadmill, so that the people might begin to share their dark secrets. As I walked down the earthen trails covered in a plethora of fallen leaves, slowly a weight was being lifted off me, and I could actually breathe again. My spirits began to lift, and I suddenly realized that there was a whole world beyond all my problems. So it suddenly made every issue I was facing seem almost minuscule and insignificant. The tall, lofty trees that towered up into the sky like natural skyscrapers seemed to hug me, as did the soft beams of sunlight that filtered so gracefully through the trees and brushed against my skin. I could hear the pretty trills of the birds rustling away at the top of the trees, and felt so connected to everything around me, and I knew that the natural world would not judge me as harshly as I judged myself, and that every tree and every blade of grass or fallen tree branch covered with lichen and moss would accept me just as I am. I had been walking for a while when I sensed I was not alone. I felt as if I was being watched, but the most unnerving part of the experience was that nobody was there. I proceeded on my way, assuring myself that my imagination was almost certainly playing tricks on me, and then there she was, standing in my path, just looking directly at me. It was a female Bigfoot. I was so astounded that I just stood there in abject horror, my legs almost folding beneath me. I felt as if I was going to pass out, as every cell in my body began to bubble over with trepidation. I don't think I've ever been so afraid, because this Bigfoot was monstrously large. I felt as fragile as a paper doll in her presence that could so easily break. She stood up proud, lofty and tall, with the statuesque grace of a ballerina, on gargantuan-sized legs that were as solid as tree trunks. She must have been about 8 foot tall, covered with long coal-coloured hair, built like a sizable army tank. I wanted more than anything else in the entire world to run away from her as fast as I could, but my legs were stubbornly refusing to move. They felt like blocks of cement beneath me. I was too afraid to look into her eyes, in case she might perceive that as a threat. But even so, I found my gaze reaching her eyes, and when her dark eyes melted into mine, I realized that she was benevolent and that I had nothing to fear. For in her eyes I discerned great intelligence and compassion. My fear flung like a pendulum from intimidation to wondrous awe. The Bigfoot stood there and just searched me with her look, and I returned her inquisitive gaze. She then scratched her head rather bashfully, as if caught up in the throes of deep contemplation, and began swinging a tree branch up and down, which rather reminded me of what I do in a restaurant, fiddling away with the paper napkins rather nervously. What happened next amazed me, because she spoke to me in a voice that was as sweet as honey, and her energy was all-consuming, so her words seemed to almost hug me. The language she spoke was not of this world, but I knew the meaning of every word, as if somewhere within my depths I had a profound knowledge of this ancient mystical tongue. Dolatika, hilotola pani, osokolaswa. You're very sad. You brought a dark shadow with you into the woods. I like to chase away dark shadows. They're not good. Dolapida, hikila swanti. What do you mean? I asked. The Bigfoot rubbed her chin. Her kind, dark, treacle-coloured eyes remained fixed on me. Dolopinaswa, dolotolapa, ikatwa. When you're sad, downcast, or in grievous despair, you create a dark shadow. It attaches to you, and you bring it with you, like a separate entity, wherever you go. You wear it on your being. And the more sad you become, the darker and bigger the shadow becomes. It feeds off your energy and grows very big. I am sad, I admitted. You don't need to tell me something I already know. Dolonika, hilatika suno, polofi. You had a dark shadow around you for quite a while. I've been watching you. Worry can do that to you. You worry too much. Well, what I do to get rid of all that worry? I asked her. Dolotaki ilana tolobo, sikashwana likali nolobo, hataki lana kwa. You do what you're meant to do. You live in the moment. You don't look back. The Bigfoot pointed at a chipmunk that was ambling up a tree branch, watching us closely. Dolatika, holoponi, sikatina. Do you think he worries about what he did yesterday? The Bigfoot asked me. No, I suspect he doesn't, I said. Dolakilakwa, hotolopasa. That's why he never carries a dark shadow in the forest with him, nor do the other animals for that matter, because even if they've been exposed to fear, they let it go. Kolotolopa ilakakwoloso. They know better than to carry it around with them. You would do well to do the same. Your kind like to carry dark shadows with them, a lot of the time. You're right, I said. I'll try to do that. The Bigfoot walked with me through the woods, and I felt as if I was with a friend. When we reached a scattering of daisies at the edge of the woods, she made me a daisy chain, which she hung around my neck. Dolotaki litoloposa fanakwa. The daisies, they're yellow like the sun. They eat the black shadows. Your dark shadow is getting less now, she told me, but it hasn't gone yet. You require lots of work. I hope you'll take my advice to heart. And with that she tapped me gently on the back and just ambled away, and I felt bitterly disappointed that she had gone. But then something quite miraculous happened. My husband came running through the trees towards me. He threw his arms around me, embracing me in a warm hug. What's that for? I asked. I thought you were mad as hell at me. I thought you were about to issue me with divorce papers. I don't know how to explain it, because I was, said my husband. But I was driving back to the house to tell you I wanted to file for divorce, because I was furiously angry. And then a great peace came over me. It was like I had an epiphany, and a strange voice seemed to speak into my heart, telling me not to focus on the past, but to live in the present, to move forward into the future. And then it made perfect sense to me, because I suddenly realized that what happened has happened, but I cannot envisage a life without you, Izzy. I'm really sorry about what happened. I know you are, he said, taking my hand in his. Let's put it behind us, shall we, and move forward with our lives. We have a bright future ahead of us. As we walked through the trees, I saw the Bigfoot peeking at us. I think we're being watched, said my husband. Don't you? I feel as if something is watching us. Well, if you think we're being watched, maybe we are, I said, but I decided not to mention the Bigfoot, that I was later to learn was my daughter's fictitious friend, the bear lady, whom Lucy had also been privy to meeting, and had not cared to mention to me. It's hard to explain, she told me. Once you've had an interaction with a Bigfoot, it's so very personal. You just don't want to share it with anyone. I knew what she meant by that. And although I don't see the Bigfoot very often, I know that I will if I'm in a bad place in my life. Because as my daughter so aptly put it, the bear lady will make you feel better. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. And I certainly do think it shows us the importance of forgiveness, because we all do make mistakes in our lives. We do things we regret. And we always need to be able to forgive and to let go of things and to move on with our lives. So there we are. That's a fabulous story. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, goodbye and good night.